All right. So first, thanks for getting together with me on this Sunday morning
You're welcome.
And,
Pleasure's all mine.
and coming to visit with me at my home. I do appreciate that. And if you can just start off by telling us, what does the lieutenant governor do?
Thank you.
What is their job? Why is it important?
A question I'm asked all the time, and it's the best question I've ever, because when you're voting for someone, you're also voting for something that they do, and you want them to do that. What the lieutenant governor does, and this is by constitution, in the Constitution of the State of Mexico, it's very specific what the lieutenant governor does. The most important thing to me is that he is, or she is, an ombudsman for the entire state of New Mexico. What does ombudsman mean? That means the lieutenant governor, interacts with you on behalf of you within the state of New Mexico. So you have a problem with things, I'll remember, everybody knows MVD. I have a problem with MVD. Who do I talk to about MVD? Go to the lieutenant governors. That's what they should be there for. The office should be there available all the time for you to do that. You have a problem with DOT, the Department of Transportation. CYFD, everybody knows that one.
Yeah.
You know, Children, Youth, and Families Department. What the lieutenant governor does is interacts on your behalf, for you, with you, and about you to those agencies, because they're bigger than the normal family, and so somebody has to be there. That's what the lieutenant governor does. The other thing that's most important that people always remember is they preside over the Senate during the 30 days and the 60 days that we're in session. That's important, but for me as a lieutenant governor candidate, it's really quite simple, because I was in the House of Representatives for 24 years. And I was, during that time period, I was the chairman of the Education Committee, the longest serving chair in New Mexico. And I was also the majority floor leader, which means we run the business of the floor in the House of Representatives. Then I would also take the chair most of the time and run the House. I would move over to the Senate and work between the Senate and the House with what their needs were and what our needs were in the Senate, and the Senate's needs were in the House. So I was constantly in the Senate doing those sorts of things. Those are important because that's what the lieutenant governor does in the Senate, but I bring what I find something different, is I can bring that knowledge that I have and experience and leadership between the House and the Senate. That makes me, different than most of the other candidates, because I have that experience. And then throughout the year, it's really up to the lieutenant governor, and that's where what I bring and say to the office is so important. Because 30 days and 60 days, it's over with, and then the session's over and you're presiding over. Then what are you doing? That's the important part.
That's the question people had.
That's right.
What's going on?
And you're going to be an ombudsman. I didn't even know what an ombudsman was. I didn't know that was your job. We've had many lieutenant governors. I served under 4 different governors, 4 different lieutenant governors. Sometimes they didn't exist. And you call the office and they're gone for the day or whatever. But, this is a full-time job. The lieutenant governor to be there for the ombudsman for the entire place and be able to advocate for people's needs. That's what the office is for. And most importantly, the lieutenant governor serves on some very important committees. One of them is the Housing Authority. I mean, that's where people are able to get jobs, and we can move that, make it a bigger operation so people can learn to get money, and when they earn the money that they have, they can get. So there's a lot to the lieutenant governor's office, depending on one thing. How involved is the lieutenant governor? That's what makes it different.
So do you see yourself, if you were elected lieutenant governor, how do you see yourself making a difference in that capacity?
The biggest difference of all is that I have knowledge and experience of 24 years of how the government works. Because remember, the major part of what the lieutenant governor is going to be interacting for you with the state government. And so if you don't know how the state government works, then you have to learn, and then by that time you're able to help somebody. I go into that office knowing exactly what it works, how it works, and what are the back problems that we've had over the years, and what is it that it's going to take to get the needs of the people's problems corrected and concerns, sought after. We're going to make them happen. But you got to know what you're doing first. That's what I do, and I know well, more than anyone else, is I understand the government of the state of New Mexico.
So are you in that capacity with these passions for wanting to be a good advocate for the people? How do you see the governor's role? I mean, are they able to hold you back at all? Does the governor have authority to be able to stop your movement?
I think a relationship between the lieutenant governor and the governor is, of course, key. But we're both elected, and so therefore the role of the lieutenant governor in Constitution says, this is my job to do. Can you hold me back from helping you? You shouldn't and you won't. I have to be very upfront about that. Mm-hmm. The most important part is that we're going to be having a relationship that's going to be going, the governor and myself, is that we talk about policy, and those are important issues. What's the policy going on in the state? And I'd be able to bring in, because of my history and my educational experience, background, and a long history of being in the community, I can bring that and help out the governor's office, which in turn helps out the lieutenant governor's office, addressing the needs of the state.
Very good. And I appreciate that very much, because I think, that was something when I told people, I want to interview Rick Miera, the lieutenant, he's running for lieutenant governor, and people said, well, what does he even do, and how is he able to even help us? And so I appreciate you shedding light on that.
And if you'd like me to expand a little bit more, I think my history, as I talked about briefly, that was just the 24 years I was in the legislature. It's what I did as a person in Albuquerque, mm-hmm. and in Bernalillo County, and in throughout the state, but specifically where I grew up. I grew up in downtown Albuquerque. I've represented downtown Albuquerque for 24 years, which means, what is downtown? Well, that goes all the way from Martinez Town over to Duranes, over to Plaza Vieja, all the way up into the university area. Mm-hmm. But all my life, I've always been working for people. That was my job. I worked at the Department of Psychiatry, and my job was to help families and kids. I'm a therapist, and I'm proud to be a therapist. That means getting involved, not standing on the sidelines and making some judgment calls. No, I get involved in each and every family member. That was my job, and I did that for 24 years, and I retired from the Department of Psychiatry, proudly saying I was doing work for families, with families, in their family homes. That's why I'm happy to be here this morning.
Can you tell, you shared with me a little bit about your experience with the Juvenile Detention Center and how you've been able to help keep kids from being incarcerated. Can you share that with us? Because that's something that's really, really important to my community.
Okay, that's good. It might take a little bit of time, so stop me because I get excited and happy about that.
No problem.
In my final years, I was able to do what I really was working towards and wanting to do for many, many years as a therapist, and that is be able to work with, because I'm, like I said earlier, I'm a licensed drug and alcohol family therapist, but mm-hmm. What I was able to do was work with kids as they got right out of the police car, unfortunately, and are getting arrested and put in the detention facility. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, I was always working with individuals who got referred to me. That being said, I had the opportunity to change kids' lives, young adult lives, as they came through the door when they were fresh. They had just been, arrested. They were scared, and for all intents and purposes, they needed help right there, and, mm-hmm. and that's when you needed to provide the help, not 2 months later after you go to court. Right. That being said, I worked very hard and was able, in a short period of time, because of my experience in working at the mental health center in various other capacities, create a mental health center about 2 feet away from the fence at the jail, at the DEET home. They came in, they saw someone at the mental health center, then they were, of course, processed and stayed maybe a shorter period of time, but that's a whole other story because I changed the length of time that they stayed in the D home. Mm-hmm. And then they were released back out in the community, but then they went through the mental health center again. And so they're getting treatment from the minute they come in to the minute they leave, and then when they leave, they can come back and get treatment without having to get rearrested again, because that mental health center is on the other side of the fence. And that was important because probation officers, everyone started utilizing all the services that we were providing, professional, medical, mental health services. And what happened in a very short period of time, to make a long story short, is we were able to drop by 2/3 the number of kids that were staying at the Juvenile Detention Center and the length of stay that they had there. And that didn't happen in about 4 or 5 years, it happened in a year. And it's been that way for 16 years because of the way you treat individuals and you believe that treatment works, and you get involved in their daily lives from school all the way to coming and see the probation officer, changes their lives. It's been that way. We had a reduction from 180 kids, it's been down to 50, and now in the last couple of years it's been no lower than 30 at any one particular time. The prison to pipeline, for all intents and purposes in New Mexico, via the D home, has been cut. We're providing individuals in the detention center that needed, mental help and mental illness help, severe mental illness. That has changed completely, very proudly. It's had an effect on the jail. Jail population is starting to come down. It's unfortunately, I say the jail, that's the MDC. The Metropolitan Detention Center still remains the largest mental health facility in the entire state. It's a jail. We're going to change that too.
And that leads into my next question is, how do you foresee that you'd be able to bring these kinds of programs and ideas to the Adult Detention Center, as specifically DOC, which is a branch of state government?
Well, by far, because what we did was not something magical, it just worked, and we got people to work together. I think as a therapist, I have this this little part of me that says, hey, let's all work together here, let's not try to go out on ourselves. By doing that, we can do that at juvenile detention centers here in Albuquerque. We're already doing it all around the state. We can do that at the Metropolitan Detention Center by doing some things that are very important, and that is identifying people's problems when they first come in, working on them when they're in the jail, and then continue working on them when they're outside of the jail. Don't let them, continue to foster on the outside of the jail to only get them arrested, only so they can come back in so they don't get any help. It's just a revolving door is mostly our fault.
Yeah.
Our fault because we didn't try to change when they were in there, sitting there doing nothing, waiting for them to leave, and when they left we didn't help them change their lives around. Of course they're going to return, that's almost a given, but we've got to change that, and we're doing that right now. When I was working, as I retired from the Department of Psychiatry and also retired from my stint as a legislator, and now I'm running for Lieutenant Governor, continue working with that. We had the 1/8 cent sales tax. I was the chairman of how you spend that money, and the first thing we did, in fact, by the time this thing gets, out out in the open, however you're going to produce it and move it along, you're going to be hearing about the fact that individuals that get out of jail at the detention facility, at MDC, they're going to come in and they're going to go through what? A mini mental health center before they get released, where they can get some services and some help. That was what I brought to the table for adults, and that's going to make a significant difference with those individuals, so they don't have that pipeline coming back to themselves. These are major issues, and I got them to also get the support, the money help. They're going to be put on Medicaid. First thing I did with the kids at the D home, put them on Medicaid so they have money for their services, and I tell you, it pays off. It's better than having them rearrested.
So I had heard about that project, and a question that someone in my community asked, well, is this a real thing, or am I free to leave? Like, if I go through this process and I'm past my release date, can they keep me there? Am I detained?
No, and that's the interesting part about it. Adults are a little bit more. I've been in here for 6 months, and I want to go home now. Well, no, we're not going to force them because they are released. But what the normal procedure was, they could be released at the jail way up in the hill, and nobody was there to pick them up. So they bring them in a bus, and they start on the corner of Roma and Fifth, and they open up the doors, and they said,
and often in the middle of the night.
Oh, often in the middle of the night.
With no
2
phone.
o'clock in the morning, when by, and then they're out in the community, and there are people that are standing there waiting for them, but it's not family members and loved ones, saying, hey, come on, I can get you some drugs, I can get you something you haven't had for a long time, and then there's just this weird weakness to like, okay, I'm going to follow them because I have nowhere to go. Well, no, the bus is going to come to that same corner, by the way. It just so happens they're going to push them on the other side, and they have to walk through the facility and there will be people at 2 o'clock in the morning, counselors, social workers, and a warm cup of coffee and a nice warm place to sit, because if it's cold outside or hot outside,
Yeah.
they can stay there until 8 o'clock in the morning. There'll be people there to work with them, and all the information that they had at the jail will be there to help them as well, get them some services. If they want to walk through and walk right out the door, they can. They're free. They're just gonna, as I talked about before earlier, they walk through the door on the way out. They have to walk through. We can't force them, but I think there are times that they're at a point, just like those young kids. You know what? I'm vulnerable. You're offering me help. I think I'm going to take it. This is to be seen, but I have the same great expectations in the short amount of time period that we have for juveniles, we're going to have for adults, because they need the same kind of support services.
And that was some feedback that I had gotten. You know, everybody thought it's a great idea, and we do need those services, and we do need that access. Is it going to have the same function as being able to come back? So I've got the services. You've showed me what it can do. I want this help now, but now it's time for me to leave the center. Can I come back if I need help?
Well, we're hoping that they leave maybe that morning. I mean, they were left off at 2 o'clock in the morning, but they've now met with a counselor. They have some sort of relationship. You know, there's some opportunities maybe to get them some housing for the night, or some just to sit there and have like I said, a warm cup of coffee until such time that family members wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning, or you can take the bus and go somewhere. We're going to give them. So yeah, that they're staying there. We're hoping they leave shortly. I mean, they're not in jail anymore. This is not a residential facility. It's only a place for help. And then meetings are set up with counselors or people that have housing facilities, whatever, and then they come back again, because it's not a one-way door. They come in and they can go out right on into Marble and just walk right out into the street into the Tijeras, right in there, and they can come right back in and get the services because they've met with a counselor. That's what I did all my life. I was one of those counselors, and so I know, we're looking forward to that person coming back and asking for more support. I think it's going to make not a big difference, it's going to make the difference.
So from the position of the governor's office for the state, one of the big hurdles for my community is lack of access. So we don't have the same access to mental health treatment that we used to have a decade ago. We don't have access to housing. Section 8 housing right now was on a 2-year waiting list for some families. And so what can we do, or what can you do from this office to be able to put more money into providing the access? Because there's a lot of people who would like to do these things. They'd like to be able to get off the streets, but the access is not there. The system does not provide those services at the scale that we need them right now.
That's very true. The access isn't there, but it's also the knowledge of how to use what is there and get that availability. If you know how the system works, then you have availability to the limited accesses that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Sure, we need to expand that. The Lieutenant Governor's office is all about, one of the important committees the Lieutenant Governor sits on is the Mortgage Finance Authority, which what that means is they give out monies and they give out projects to cities and counties to build more housing, build affordable housing, and put in such things as tiny home villages, which is something that just so happens my wife and I work on a daily basis. She's responsible for tiny home villages in
wonderful. I've
in
been invited to the meetings. Yeah.
You've been invited to those meetings. That's going to happen, but we need to have input from the state because whether it's homelessness here or it's homelessness created by the fact that they were in jail for the last 4 months and their families disowned them and they're just out and about. All those, have one thing in common, is that we need somebody to help them because on their own they're not going to help. The Lieutenant Governor's office can direct the impetus to do this all statewide. I personally am not going to be building that homes, but we need to get people to build more homes. We need to be able to put the monies in there. That's what the Lieutenant Governor brings with push for the governor, or more importantly, because I've been in the legislature, my ability to go to the legislature, the House and the Senate, and say, these are important things the Lieutenant Governor thinks are very important, and I'll sit with you and work with them. These things happen. How? Because I know how they done. I've been doing it for the last 30, 40 years of my life.
So we talked a lot about like the early stages of incarceration and people in crisis. What are your ideas for getting us from being number one in private prisons in New Mexico? I mean, those contracts are 20 years long. They require a head count in these beds. Most of the people that I know, when they are sent to prison, when they're sentenced, they end up at Hobbs and Clayton, which are the furthest facilities from their families, because they're geo-group prisons and they have to keep those beds full.
Yeah.
And so what can you do to help with us not being number one anymore?
Well, you go to bring the most interesting point up. We're number one, but we're number one with our own prisoners, from people from Albuquerque? Not necessarily. These are private prisons. They get prisoners from wherever they can get them. And New Mexico, as of late, has been one of the least producing prisoners for their population growth. You know, we have one up here in Estancia. That one's closing. Why is it closing? We don't have any more prisoners. New Mexico has stopped sending them prisons because of the situation that I've just talked about. We had MDC, which was full. Remember, it was like overflowing, and now it's down to 2,500. It's set up for 3,000. You know, we're down to 2,500 now. We're not keeping them in jail as long as we used to. The people would like to be able to put everybody in jail. You know, you get a minor violation. Well, they're going to keep them in jail, depending on which radio station you listen to. You know, no, we don't have to do that. We're not doing that anymore. It's not cost effective, and it's certainly not effective for the prisoner. So what we have to do is continue what we're doing now, and we run these guys out of business, these private prisons, by stop sending them prisoners, for one thing. And so that is the most important issue, whether it's at the juvenile detention facility, which doesn't have a private prison, for the adults that do, and we don't keep individuals in there, or we just don't get them to the point where they're committing repeat crimes and they're second and third time offenders, which goes against them. We change the livelihood in which they're working with. They come in, they get arrested for whatever it was, and then they don't come back because they're getting support services, just what we finished talking about. That's how you stop this whole idea of these private mega prisons that are out there, because I've looked at them, and most of those prisoners were coming from Texas or somewhere else. But the place that we should be taking care of them is right in our own backyards, and even most judges will agree with that. You know, they don't like sending somebody away from where their family is, because they're not going to get any better unless they have that family relationship. But that being said, it's going to be up to us, the legislature, you know, the community, to say this is what we want. We don't want, you know, high, intense, you know, what I mean by intense is high security, from high security
Come and get Jen.
individuals, you know, put in jail for minor crimes. Not a good use of our taxpayer dollars.
So something that's that has been a trend as of late, as you indicated, we're not sending as many inmates to prisons. So what's happening in some of these facilities is they're delaying the starting of parole plans. They're delaying approving parole plans. So we have huge numbers of people that are doing something that's what's called in-house parole. And so people are being held incarcerated beyond their release dates on something that's completely administrative. And this is a branch of DOC. This is under the state's control. What do you think you could do to help resolve those issues?
Take them out of state's control and put them under local control, such as Bernalillo County. Bernalillo County is responsible for the jail. It's Bernalillo County's money that we're using to pay for all that. You know, right now, Bernalillo County is very happy that they brought their population down, because that's less money that they have to spend up there. And so therefore, judges are much more willing to do a 200 or 364-day sentence and keep them here than make it a 2-year sentence and they send them up to Santa Fe, whereas what you're just talking about continues to happen. I think we need to move the ability to say we're going to do something for your client, because I think judges really want to have something to do with their client. They want them to be able to change, so you got to put them in a place where that happens. Is that going to happen up in Santa Fe? Probably not. Is that going to happen in the closing prisons that we have, you know, that are professionally run by somebody else, that they're in it for the money? Of course not.
Well, and there's some things that are happening, you know, and when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about people that are already sentenced. These are guys who have done 5 years, their 5-year sentence. and they're supposed to be working on parole. And these people are being held, because on a 5-year sentence, you would have a 2-year parole term. So these are people that are being, some of them are doing their entire parole periods incarcerated beyond their sentence. So they're, right now, the state of New Mexico is using parole to enhance sentences on people. And that is a practice that's completely administrative and a DOC issue. The other thing that we're seeing, another trend that has happened, is probation violations, technical violations. I was late on my curfew. I was positive for marijuana, and they're literally being sentenced to all of their suspended time, some of them for decades. I know a guy who had a curfew violation and got 19 years suspended time for that. Do you see yourself being able to help in those areas of incarceration?
I understand how that works. The answer is yes, but I understand how that works, and coming strictly from a juvenile perspective on this one. Probation violation is a serious offense. Just the name. Well, you think, well, probation violations, that is an offense in and of itself. Then you have the offense that created it, smoking marijuana. Didn't come in to see the probation officer, or didn't even show up on time. Bad probation officer, go ahead and revokes him for doing that, or her. And a variety of other little things. For adolescents, it's, like you said, they're out at curfew. But they got a probation violation. That's charged as worse than anything else. And the worst case is, if you were an adult, that wouldn't even be a chargeable offense.
Right.
Well, there's no such thing. But what happens is they use that to harass the client. And so what you do is you stop putting an opportunity available for those things to happen. And more than anything else, we need to move away from probation violations for such things that any of that crime
Technical violations
would not be a crime for anyone else. Come on. We need to start doing it. And we've been able to go back, and many people that are watching this, go back and look at my bill, because I had an awful lot to do with changing earlier. We talked about June. I rewrote the bill for juvenile violations, and the whole purpose of that bill is not about punishment. It's all about rehab.
Right.
And we need to do that with adults. It can be done. I did it with the juvenile law, and one time he's come in. Originally, the juvenile side, you had to be in there for 30 days. I saw reality. You know what happens? PO would come in, attorney would come in on the 27th day and then the 30th day, just routinely. Okay, now we're going to start working on your plan. Move that from 30 days and moved it to 15. Now they come in on 12, but at least we're moving them a lot quicker.
Right.
Those things can happen, and they can happen within the confines of the legislature and the state of New Mexico. All because it's all about getting better, not about keeping people in prison. And that costs money anyway, too much money.
Sorry. Go ahead.
So you understand where I'm coming from. I have
Yeah,
I have real serious concerns about that.
Well,
That we're creating a nice little niche for private prisons.
and we certainly have. The other concern that I would like to discuss is the things that are happening within the prison structure. So the state of New Mexico is who facilitates or oversees the contracts with the private prisons. We have some things going on right now, for example, in Hobbs. They are limiting the amount of toilet paper that inmates have access to. Each inmate is given one roll of toilet paper for a week and a half. These are grown adult men. Some of them have illnesses. Right now, people in the facility of a Hobbs prison, the Geo Group prison, these are state of New Mexico inmates who are almost having to fight for toilet paper. This is crazy. The amount of money that is poured into the Department of Corrections to have things like they don't have toilet paper. So when you talk about rehabilitation, there's no access to education. There's no access to treatment programs in these facilities. I know about the budget for DOC. Do you see yourself as somebody who could get involved in helping to bring transparency first to that office and putting people there who actually are interested in seeing incarceration reduced.
Right. Well, your last point is the best point, right? Who benefits from having prisoners dissatisfied, acting up, and creating more problems for themselves than when they came in? Who benefits from that? Certainly not the prisoner.
Mhm.
So it's the person running the prison. So if you have too much ambiguity as to what is expected from a good run prison, that's what you're gonna have. You're gonna say, I know how to make you angry, I know how to keep you here about 6 months longer than you intended to be here.
Exactly.
I just push your button, push your mental health button, and you'll
Exactly.
cooperate with me, and you stay 6 months longer, I get 6 months more. I mean, it's a very simple solution. And that's a very simple problem, and the solution is just as simple. We've got to be able to stop allowing these individuals to have the open-ended door that they have, that they can make those kinds of decisions. No, it should be very clear. These individuals are getting paid a lot of money, certainly enough for an extra roll of toilet paper, as your example. For them to be able to hold back, why are we doing this? Let's look at that. Let's look at that transparency. What are the rules and regulations under which these individuals that run these private prisons operate, or are they left wide open? If they're left wide open, all you're doing is allowing them to create more money for themselves. Waste of our money. If people thought about it in that fashion, they wouldn't be thinking about it, oh, these are bad prisoners, only give one roll of toilet paper. Think about it, put it in perspective, and you're going to find that it's the best thing for the client, it's the best thing for your tax dollar, and it's not going to help private prisons. I'm not into helping private prisons at all.
Very good. So one thing that I saw when I interviewed SGR Stephanie Garcia Richard on the land commissioner issues, I was looking at the beneficiary list on the land commissioner list, and the state penitentiary's on there, receiving millions and millions of dollars with no accountability. DOC, the state penitentiary, falls underneath this office, right? Yeah, it's a branch, an administrative branch run by the state. Her indications were that as land commissioner, once they release the money to the beneficiaries, they don't go back and look at where the money was spent.
Well, they should.
I agree. And I did bring that forward in that interview. But what can you do from the other side, from being on the receiving end of these monies? How can you bring transparency to those budgets?
Well, I tell you, the answer is looking at another agency. That same fund that we're talking about also gives money to education. Are there expected audits of education? Daily, right? Why not? That money, if you looked at who gets the money, also higher ed gets the money. Do they expect audits of those? Most certainly. So we're giving it to DOC. Are they unauditable? No. Should they be audited? Yes.
Very good.
Just like everybody else.
So do you think that that's something you would be able to help with?
I don't think it's more than just helping with. I think it's something that is expected, and if it's not, then we're running short of ourselves. These are issues